Hey nerds, JJ Kai Morris here. Welcome to my channel. Today I'm going to be talking about the 5 young adult series that changed my life as an adolescent. So, if you're of age, grab a glass of wine and join me on this journey through my childhood. And I'd also love to hear along the way in the comments what you think of these young adult books, if you've read them, and also what your journey was as a young reader, and what made you decide to start reading and or writing. We're going to start off with the number one book that changed my life as a kid, and that is not an original story. It's the book that changed a generation, the whole publishing industry, and just kind of the world forever. And that is J.K. Rowling's Harry Potter series. And this book was a game changer for many, many reasons, not just me personally, but in the publishing industry as well. J.K. Rowling changed the world for sure. So I started off, these books were read to me as a child, and I think I was probably about like 7, somewhere around that age, when my dad started reading them to my sister and I. And I just have these really great nostalgic memories of my dad reading these books to my sister and I. He would sit on his easy chair and read to us, and my sister and I would sit on the floor and just imagine the adventures of Harry, Ron, and Hermione. And so by the time the final book came out, I was about 13 at the time when the Deathly Hallows came out, and I read that book on my own. I remember lugging that giant-ass book all through middle school when I was about in 6th grade, and I read that one on my own. But before that, I did go back and reread all the original books that were read to me. So by the time I had finished the series, I had read them all on my own. This definitely set me down the path of really loving fantasy. And so I think a lot of the problems with people don't really understand Harry Potter is they don't understand that it's a fantasy series. You know, all the people who, I remember some kids, their parents wouldn't let them read the book because it had witchcraft in it. But they didn't understand that witchcraft is, you know, in the form of fantasy, not real, like, Wiccan witchcraft, which I'll get into later. So yes, I definitely do not agree with, you know, some of the criticism that comes with Harry Potter and J.K. Rowling. The books are definitely, they start off in this middle grade area, so you're kind of meant to read them, you know, at like 11 or, you know, 10 or 11 age, or have them read to you, but by the end of the series, you're kind of meant to grow up with Harry, and by the end of the series, it does this beautiful transition from like a middle grade book to a young adult book, and that the themes get much darker and much more serious by the end. So if you really want to experience Harry Potter as I think that it was intended, I think you would have to kind of be the age that Harry is in the books. And so it worked out perfectly for, you know, my generation, where, you know, we would have to wait for the next book or movie to come out, and so we would have like that time to grow up in between then, and by the time the final book came out, we were ready for those darker themes, those more real and scary tones. And I have to say also, never in my life, before or since, have I been as excited for a movie premiere as I was for when the next Harry Potter movie would come out. And so a little bit too young to remember when the books were being released. I know that was a big craze, but for me, my memories were like when the movie would come out. I would be sitting in the theater so stoked, so excited, and I'm still waiting for another opportunity to recapture that magic of being so excited for a movie release of a book that I had read. The next series that changed my life was Darren Shan's The Saga of Darren Shan, beginning with the Cirque du Freak book. This book was also read to me in the beginning, so my sister read these books to me, and they are such fantastic books. Again, this kind of set me in the realm of liking a little bit darker things, a little bit more horror-oriented or fantasy-oriented. And so I started off having these read to me when I was probably like 7 or something. By the end of the series, I was definitely reading them on my own. The last book came out probably when I was about 10, and so I could read them on my own. And then I did go back and reread the ones that were read to me. So I have read these books in their entirety on my own, and they are so amazing. The main character is hilarious, and I think that what I learned from this book is that how humor can balance out dark themes in your book to make it to the point where adding in a little bit of humor kind of gives the book a little bit of a breath of, you know, break from all the darkness and all the dark tones. And yes, I definitely fell in love with these characters. And I also have some great memories of my sister and I begging my mom to take us to Barnes & Noble so that we could get the next book when it came out. My sister and I would be so stoked to get to Barnes & Noble and pick out the next book in the series. And I'm still, I think Brandon Sanderson in his Stormlight Archive releases have gotten close to recapturing that magic. But I don't know, there's something about just being a kid and like finally getting to Barnes & Noble, to finally get the book that you've been waiting for, to hear what happens next with your favorite character. And so, yes, this book definitely set me on the path of being more into like horror-themed, dark-themed, fantasy-themed genres. Okay, the next series that really was integral. That's one of those words that I've only ever actually seen written. So how do you pronounce it? We'll go with integral. Another series that was integral in my adolescence was a book that a lot of people probably feel the same about. This is another one. Either you love this book or these set of books, or you fucking hate these set of books. It's either the one or the other. But that book is, of course, Stephenie Meyer's Twilight series. And I'm sorry, I hate this cover because I hated the movie. So don't look at the cover. I had the original cover with like the hands and the apple. Was my sister's copy. So I ended up getting this one at a thrift store for like $1. But yeah, don't look at the cover. Cover's awful. Anyway, I have a lot to say about Stephenie Meyer, okay? So get ready. Get your wine ready. If you don't like Stephenie Meyer, if you don't like Twilight, be ready for me to preach at you for a couple minutes. Stephenie Meyer, wow, she is an amazing author, okay? And I know she's gotten a lot of flack over the years, and I think most of it has to do with how poorly portrayed these set of books were in movie format. But I know she gets a lot of flack for not being sophisticated enough, for having plot holes, or blah, 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 blah. I don't care. If you can inspire a generation of people to pick up books and to be interested in reading and enjoy the experience of reading, I think you are a success. Stephenie Meyer is amazing at telling stories. She's just a great storyteller. She writes stories that you needed to hear, that you didn't know you needed to hear, but you needed to hear it. I read Twilight when I was about 11. I read it in the 5th grade, and that's not me trying to like flex or anything, but I didn't want to read this book at first. It was a 500-page book, and I was 11. I was like, I don't really want to read a 500-page book. That sounds awful to me. But my sister forced me to read it because she read it first, and she was like, you have to read this. And so I'm so thankful for my sister forcing me to read this book because it is fantastic. And it changed my life forever in that it made me a reader. If there's any like one book that I can like put my finger on and say, this book turned me into a reader, it would be Stephenie Meyer's Twilight series. And so yeah, honestly, I don't know if I would have become as big of a reader as I am if I hadn't read Twilight. And honestly, if I hadn't been as big of a reader as I am, I don't know if I would have become a writer. So I have Stephenie Meyer to thank for inspiring me to read more and subsequently to write in the first place. So yes, you can say whatever you want about Stephenie Meyer, but she is a great storyteller and she has inspired a generation. I think a lot of the discontent with Stephenie Meyer's Twilight series comes from the movies. So I actually recently went back and rewatched the movies like a year or so ago. I remember when they first came out, I kind of liked them because I was like a teenager and I don't know, I liked that the movies were very close to the book. They didn't change a whole lot. So the movies were kind of almost like word for word from the book, which I really liked at the time. But now going back to rewatch the series as an adult, I can definitely understand why people were like, this is awful, this is terrible, why do people like this? And I think the movie was just a bad portrayal of the book. Even though it didn't stray from the storyline, even though it was almost word for word, the acting was bad, the special effects were bad, the script was bad, the writing, it was just bad. All over. Bad movie. Don't watch the movies. I think there's a lot of closet Twilight fans out there. And I think I was for a while. I knew for a while I was definitely embarrassed by the fact that I loved Twilight and it was one of the books that shaped my adolescence. But I think you should be proud. Be proud of liking Twilight because this woman has sold millions of copies. She inspired a generation. And as a writer, I can only hope to be like her. Yes, Twilight fans, come out of the closet, please. The 4th series of books that changed my life forever was Lori Ferris Delars's Blue is for Magic series. And this, again, very dark themes. This one actually involves witchcraft in the form of like Wiccan witchcraft, which I loved at the time. I was so taboo and so dangerous. And this is definitely like a young adult thriller. I was always at the edge of my seat reading these books. The main thing that I have to say about this series of books is that never before or since in my entire life have I read a book that inspired such raw emotion. and this isn't a spoiler, I hope this isn't a spoiler to say, but at some point in this four-book series, I cried myself to sleep for weeks. And I'm not exaggerating. I think it was at least a week that I cried myself to sleep every night because I was so moved by this series and something that happened in it, which I'm not going to say because I don't want to spoil it for you if you decide to read it. But I think anytime a writer can inspire such feelings in the reader is when you really know that you're a success in writing. And so this book changed my life forever, and it may, again, you know what, I read it when I was about 13, like, between the ages of, 12 and 13, so I probably had some, pent-up emotions that maybe these series of books were just a good way for me to, have an excuse to, cry in the first place. But never have I been so moved by a set of books. Moved to, literal tears, and not just tears, like ugly crying. These series of books are so good. Again, I mean, I do have problems with it in some aspects. Maybe I would love to do, a whole video on these series of books. So let me know in the comments if you've read this series and you want to talk about it. This series of books showed me that writing can affect the readers so much that it makes you cry or makes you so happy. That's the power of writing. I think it's so strange that some words on a page can evoke so much emotion in someone and be totally subjective to the audience, that it may affect one person this way, it may affect another person this way, but it's kind of like magic. So the final series that changed my adolescence is Ellen Hopkins' Crank series. There are many books in the series. The first 3 is a trilogy that follows the same timeline, or follows the same set of characters, and then the next few books are kind of in their own series. But I like to lump them all together. There's 10 of them. I read all of them, and to say that I devoured these books would be putting it lightly. I think I read the first book, Crank, in probably one whole day, and then I immediately flipped the book over and started over from the beginning. And I can only say that about a couple books in my life. But these books are written so beautifully. If you don't know anything about Ellen Hopkins' writing, she writes entirely in this poetry-style prose. It's all written in poetry format, but there is a narrative that weaves in between this beautiful writing, and you get a whole story throughout the book. And it's not to the point where it's the poetry is so ambiguous and beautiful and cryptic that you don't understand the story. The story is very clear in the writing. It's just such a creative and new way to write a novel. It's beautiful, and it's the first book that inspired me to actually write myself. So I read these books when I was between the ages of 13 and 15, when I was a teenager, and I took up poetry like it was going out of style after reading these books. I was so inspired that I wrote my own poetry for a number of years, and I kind of became a writer as a teenager, as I feel like a lot of teenagers do when they have all this pent-up angst and they don't know what to do with it, all these emotions that they don't know how to sort through. I think a lot of us resort to writing, which is wonderful. And so this was the first time I ever started writing. And I actually recently found my old notebook full of poetry that I had written when I was a teenager, and I'm really excited. In my next video, hopefully my husband and I will have a few drinks and then read that poetry out loud to all of you guys, if it's not too cringy. But yes, honestly, I don't know if I would have had the experience or the know-how to craft a beautiful sentence if I hadn't practiced when I was a teenager. And if I hadn't read these books, I don't know if I would have ever written poetry. And I think poetry is a great way to kind of just flex your writing muscles and to get it's just great practice, even if you don't ever end up publishing any of your poetry, even if poetry isn't something that you really get into or really decide to go for in life. I think it's a great way to start, a great place to start, because you can finish a poem in a couple days or a day or an hour or 15 minutes, and you get that instant sense of I accomplished something, I wrote something that is finished, a finished work. Versus if you're writing a novel, it's all right, this is going to take at least some months at a time to finish a full-fledged novel. So something that she did with this series is introduce dark topics that were not sugar-coated at all. They were based on true events, and she didn't try to wrap it up in a pretty little fairy tale at the end. She gave you the raw story and ended it a way that was dark and tragic, and it was great. This is where I learned that having tragic endings is a thing. You can end something tragically. You can have an ending where the hero doesn't overcome their monsters. And I think that's a great lesson to learn, is how you can write something that is so true to the human condition that your hero is not, or your hero or your protagonist is not always going to win at the end of the day. And so it covers everything from like drug addiction to prostitution, and it is so dark. Again, yeah, this is something that really inspired me to get more into darker themed things and to really explore how to write a story and how real life can be an inspiration for writing, and how you don't always have to wrap up everything in a pretty little bow and make everyone win at the end of your story. You can have a dark ending and have it still be satisfying to the reader. So I would love to reread this series, and maybe at some point I'll put together like a whole couple months where I can do a reread of all the books that inspired me as a young adult. Let me know what you guys think of these series. Please let me know if you've read any of them and your thoughts on them as well. And then also drop down in the comments and let me know what are the books or series of books that inspired you as a young adult, or changed your life, or evoked some kind of emotion in you as a young adult, or even as an adult. Like, at what point did you become a reader? At what point did you decide that reading is a magical thing, and how you can experience reading in a way that is life-changing? And so, yeah, drop that down in the comments. Let's start a conversation about young adult books and about books that changed our lives. And then if you guys want to get to know me personally, feel free to follow me on all my social medias. I'm on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. And if you really, really want to be my friend, go down into the description to my website, kaimorris.com, and sign up for my newsletter. Anyway, thanks for watching, nerds. Until next time.